Okay, in this video, we're going to take a look at the people of God as a temple and Torah community. Um, let's start with a look at the temple community. If we look at the temple community, we can say it's founded more or less in 515 BC, when the Jews returned from the Babylonian exile and rebuilt the Jerusalem temple. Okay, this is the temple that was built by King Solomon at the beginning of the nation-state period. And then it was sacked by the Babylonians in 587 BC when they took the Jews or the southern Israelites into exile. The temple lasted until 70 AD when the Romans destroyed it in response to a Jewish revolt. Now, why were they destroying it in response to a Jewish revolt? Because Judah at that time, around the time of Jesus, existed as a semi-autonomous or satellite nation within the Roman Empire. Okay, and before that, it existed as a semi-autonomous or satellite nation within a series of Greek rulers. And before that, it existed the same thing under Persian rule. Okay, so you had this long history where ever since the Babylonian exile, right, ever since about 587 BC, Judah, that is the southern tribe of Israel, they existed as a semi-autonomous nation. So they were like a people within a greater state. So they could practice their own form of society within the larger state. So you kind of had this center. Now, it wasn't just in Judah or just in Jerusalem that the Jews made this kind of, had their own society within the state. Within all these empires, going back to the Babylonian Empire, you had enclaves of Jews all throughout these larger states. So the Second Temple was not a nation state within a state. It was controlled by the high priest, not a king. Right, that king period, which we'll find out ends up being seen as so antithetical to what it means to be the people of God. That's not part of the Second Temple. The Second Temple collected taxes to support the priest in various aspects of the rituals in the temple cult, but it was not forced collection. Jews from Jerusalem and all over the world, we say those are Jews living outside of Jerusalem, or Jews in the diaspora, they paid voluntarily, right? It was seen to them as something they wanted to do. And Jews would come from all over the world, from all over the diaspora, all over the various empires which had rule over Judah at that time. They would come from all over and come and participate in festivals at the temple in Jerusalem. So in part of the Old Testament, Lofrank points out in Ezekiel here, the temple becomes this like the embodiment of the free and just society, right? Why? Well, it's contained within a larger unjust society, right? The empire, the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, right? The Persian Empire, but within those enclave communities that got from all over those empires, which then support the temple and gather in it periodically, right? That is the voluntary, the just and free society, right? And again, it's not run by a king; it's run by priests, right? Who represent God's will to the people, right? Who offer the people sacrifices to God, right? And who accept the people's gifts voluntarily, not forcibly. So Lofink really seems to like the temple model, but what he really likes is the Torah, right? The Torah model. Remember the Torah, he called it earlier in the text, the social experiment, right? The social project, sorry, not experiment, project, the social project. In the Torah, you had the way of living that was the free and just society, right? He said, it's not enough for God to free them from slavery in Egypt. God freed them from slavery in Egypt and then immediately gives them the Torah. Why? Because the Torah stops them from going back into slavery, right? And this is why the Deuteronomistic writers and Lofins are so critical of the nation-state period, when the Israelites adopt a king and kind of start living the same oppressive lifestyle, the same oppressive structures as the other nations, right? As represented by the gods of the other nations, right? So the temple gave the Jewish people who were enclaved all over the world, all over these other major empires, a place to come back to. But the Torah gave them the way to be Jewish, the way to be who they were, right? The way to be the people of God, not just when they came to the temple in Jerusalem, but when they lived in their enclave communities all over these other empires. And what did it do? Well, it gave them a story. It gave them a history. It gave them a way to understand themselves as the people of God, right? Even if they weren't living in the promised land, even if they weren't living in Judah, even if they were living in Alexandria, where at some point in history there were more Jews in Alexandria than there were in Jerusalem. But they could be Jewish there. Why? Because the Torah was like their portable home. And so if we look at the Torah, you'll see the Deuteronostic source, right? Kind of prescribe or describe what the people of God is like. And when we look at the Torah, when the Torah talks about the foundations of Israel, it starts with Abraham and then goes into the Exodus story, right? How God freed his people from slavery in Egypt. And then it ends before they enter the promised land. In other words, before they go into the period of kings, before they become a nation state. The nation state period is not in the Torah, right? You see what's going on there. The D source, the Deuteronomistic writers, they're writing their history after the period of the kings, after the nation state period. And when they're writing it, they're saying, this was not who we are. In other words, this is not the form we want to take. We're the people who God freed from the oppression of kings. Right? So our period of kingship is not essential. That was almost like a wrong turn. That was almost like a detour for them. Now, they do see it as real. It was there. God was with them through it. They are going to see some good things come out of it. But it's not who they are. It's not their essential form. It's not crucial. What is crucial is that God heard the call of these poor slaves in Egypt, these oppressed slaves, and he freed them from slavery. And he taught them, right, not to enslave each other. That's God's covenant with the people that Moses delivered on Mount Sinai, right after the Red Sea was parted and they escaped from Egypt. So the social order of the Torah has nothing to do with the king of the state. Where do they get the Torah? Again, on Mount Sinai in Egypt. Where's that? It's not in Egypt, not in the original oppressive nation state. It's not in Jerusalem, which is the Jewish state, right? Okay, that's the capital city of King David, right? The king of Israel, God's anointed king, right? But guess what? He's still a king. And they say, no, this kind of nation state, this kind of place where we have class distinctions and the rich dominate the poor, right? That's not who we are. That's not the form that the people of God were formed as. That's not our origin, and therefore that's not our true meaning. The great quote there by Lofink on 114, explaining what the people of God are supposed to be like according to the Torah. He talks about eliminating structures of poverty. Foreigners must be given the same kind of help as one would offer their own brother or sister. Right? Because again, remember, it's not a God of your tribe. It's not a God of your nation state. It's not a God of it was a projection of your own selfish desires. Yahweh was revealed to the Israelites in the very act of abandoning and escaping the self-interest of the powerful elite, the state, and the other powers that be in the ancient Near East. Is revealed to them as a God who cares for the poor, cares for every person, the least powerful person and the most powerful person, the most vulnerable person and the least vulnerable person. And therefore he always comes to the defense of the poor, of the vulnerable, and always is condemning through his prophets the rich in their practices when they are taking advantage of the poor instead of helping them take care of them. That's what we're talking about, other gods. It's not like, God is just, well, you just are supposed to worship one God because it's just me. And, if you worship these other gods, they're the wrong ones. It's me versus them. No, they're different, right? The God of the Israelites represents a different kind of life, a different vision, a different worldview. It's not just that there are other gods, they're different. They didn't represent, they don't mean what Yahweh means. That's the God of might, right? The gods of might and oppression are to have no place among the people of God. So Lofing points out the temple is destroyed, but guess what? It's okay, right? They didn't need the temple because they had the Torah. You didn't have to go to Jerusalem to be a member of the just and loving community, right? They could live that out in their own community, enclave, all throughout the empires that dominated them. So most telling about this form for Lofink is that he doesn't offer any issues with it, the way that he offered issues with the other forms that we've gone through so far. Why? Because it's voluntary and free, right? No one was trying to force them into it, right? What else? They have a just and loving community. They had the Torah as the center of their lives, right? That's what made them who they were, right? And what else? It's free from the gods of state, right? So they lived within the states, within the empires, and the empires venerated their kings as gods, just like the Canaanite states did, just like Egypt had, right? And they encouraged the poor and the empires encouraged the poor to see themselves as servants or slaves of the gods, and therefore the servants or slaves of the rich. But they had those class structures and they had those worldviews. But the Jews lived within those empires without adopting those worldviews. They had their own worldview, right? The worldview of the Torah, which prescribed a society of justice, a society of freedom, a loving community of free persons.